Howdo, I'm Mark from Morrigan's Creations, and today we're going to be doing a test of two different painting techniques. We're going to be comparing Slapchop to traditional layer painting. To do this, I first grabbed my model, which is the Bullywug from Artisan Guild, and I started to prep my model for the Slapchop technique. To do this, I started with a dry brush, or more, an overbrush of Dawnstone, and then I moved in with some Pallid Witch Flesh just a little bit later on, and just brushed that on directly from the top. In essence, these two steps are going to carry most of your model for this technique. It's going to show up all the highest points, it's going to do your highlights, your shadows, all in 2 steps. The rest of the work is going to be done by the contrast paints. Out of interest, I decided that I was going to start at 1 o'clock and I was going to time how long it took me to complete the model using this technique. And surprisingly, it didn't really take that long, but I feel like the results show that there wasn't as much time spent on it. So using this technique, I'm trying to be a little careful where I'm placing these paints because it's not exactly easy to fix. You'd have to go in with more layering. At least that's what I'd have to do anyway. Before starting to paint, I had already selected all the colours that I was going to use, like this ultramarine blue. And I did actually thin these down slightly with a bit of water. There is absolutely nothing stopping you from using this straight from the paint pot, but I decided to thin it down a bit, and that's potentially why the contrast isn't as high as I'd like. Now this contrast paint that I'm going to be showing you now, which is Leviathan Purple, is one of my 2 favourite paints. I'd say it's on par with Wildwood. The contrast is absolutely amazing, even thinned down. Just look how it goes onto this flag. Honestly, it's one of my favourite paints. To be fair, this Blood Angels Red is also quite contrasty, but when you compare it to the layering technique, which you'll see later on in the video, it doesn't really stand out as well. You don't get a lot of those colour changes in the different values, if you get me. I know that this commentary sounds a little one-sided, as I prefer the layering technique, I'll be honest about that. But to be fair, this Slapchop technique is good for a fair few reasons. The main one is it doesn't take as much time to paint. So if you're somebody who hasn't got a lot of spare time, you've got a lot of commitments, I'd recommend this. I'd say this technique's probably for you. But if you're willing to spend that extra bit of time on the model, I'd say definitely go with layering. So we're just painting the shoulder pads here. I decided to do them leather. And that's bringing us to the end of the model. And I'm going to be showing up on screen now how long it took. Personally, I think that 31 minutes is quite quick. I'm quite a slow painter, and I was taking my time a little bit with this model. So as you can see in this shot, the contrast doesn't look as clear as it should be. That might be because I watered it down slightly, or it could just be this batch of paint. But now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying my favourite technique. We're going to go with some layering. So to start this off, we're going to thin down some Cantor Blue. And when I say that we're thinning it down, I mean we are really thinning it down. We're going to be wanting to do a fair few layers of this. Some say 2 thin coats. I think I did maybe 4 coats because of how thin I had the paint. But once you get started on this kind of painting, well, for me, honestly, I get drawn in. If I start painting like this, doing lots of layers, I get easily distracted by it, and I can spend hours and hours working on a model. Sometimes even ending up where I look up at the clock and 2 to 3 hours have passed. To some of you that might not seem long, and some of you might spend 10, 12 hours on a model. Some of you do it in one sitting. I don't do it in one sitting. I try to get away from it for a little bit and come back with some fresh eyes just to see if there's anything that I could have done differently, anything I can improve upon before I move on to the next steps. Obviously I'm not going to show every single layer that I did, every single brush stroke, because this video will be way too long. So next I thinned down some Sotek green, and I started to layer this onto the model as well. And as always, I'm thinning down this paint. I'm using just regular tap water. I'm not using any special mediums, just regular tap water. And I'm applying this almost like a glaze to the model. But with each new layer, I'm painting a smaller area of the model, building up to more of a highlight towards that standard colour that I'm using until it's built up to that pure form of that colour, and then I move on to the next highlight colour. So I'm pretty sure you saw me then in the bottom left hand corner coming up with that little sign. And I really would appreciate if you did subscribe. The amount of support that I've had this year has been amazing. I've got stuck at 77 subs for probably about a month, and then all of a sudden I blew up and I'm now at 153 at the time of recording. And I just want to see if we can get to 200, or as close to 200 as we can before the end of 2022. So if you can, if you want to, if you think that I have earned it, please consider subscribing. So as you can see, this blue compared to the Slapchop technique is a lot more vibrant. At least I think it is anyway. We do a little comparison at the end of the video, side by side. This is actually the same exact model, I just primed over it because it was nice thin layers. But by utilising this layering technique, I feel we have more control over where the light falls, and a lot more control over the contrast of the model. Right now I am adding a dark brown, which I have mixed as part of, I think it was Thondia brown, but I also mixed that with a bit of a standard blue just to darken it up a little bit, which is also a good point. If you're going to try and make a lighter colour of the one you're using, never use white, because this tends to desaturate the colour. I'm sure if you've watched any videos from anybody else who does this topic, they've probably told you exactly the same, but it is really important. Never use white. Always mix it with something close to it on the colour wheel. So if you're doing a red and you want to go more towards a yellow, add some more yellow. That'll build it up to an orange, and that will help you transition into that yellow. If you're trying to go darker with the red, mix in some dark blue. That moves the temperature slightly down, but it tends to look better than if you add black, because you're then desaturating the paint that you're using. Talked about a few things in this video, and I was on about the benefits of using the Slapchop technique. I know I mostly talked about how good layering was, I'll be honest, and I know what I'm like. I praise this technique, but I know it's not for everybody. Like I said, Slapchop is better for you if you don't have as much time, or you don't want to spend as much time, or even if you've got a lot of models to paint. It's perfectly fine to use that technique. If you're like me and you don't really play the games, you just like having the model sat on your shelf, and you're prepared to spend more time on the model, I'd recommend this technique way more. So now we're actually working on some non-metallics. I did that in my last video, which will be in the top right hand corner now. Watch that if you haven't already. And I got some feedback on that the contrast wasn't as high as it should be, so I really pushed it with this one, starting at a dark brown, moving up into the yellow, and I think it really paid off. So here's the comparison side by side. You let me know which one you prefer, Slapchop or layering. Thanks for watching.